What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're doing a review roundup where I'm going to be covering a brand new film that just dropped this weekend, as well as two newer films that dropped within the last few weeks that I've been wanting to check out. And unfortunately, I was actually under the weather this week, which is why I haven't had a lot of videos on the channel this week. But I do want to take a quick moment and thank you guys for checking out some of my more recent videos while I was away. I really appreciate all of your support. And yeah, I'm feeling a lot better today. I actually tried to film this yesterday. I filmed like a 20-something minute video. Wasn't really feeling it, got discouraged, and I ended up just turning the camera off, and I didn't really feel like filming again. So here we are today, and we're gonna be talking about, like I said, a brand new film that just dropped this weekend. And let's go ahead and start with that one, and that is Babylon. Written and directed by Damien Chazelle and starring people like Brad Pitt, Jovan Adepo, Margot Robbie, Diego Calva, Tobey Maguire, and Jean Smart, this film centers on a group of characters all working within the film industry of the early Hollywood days and chronicles the time from silent pictures to the talkies. So going into this film, I was actually really excited, as Damien Chazelle is without a doubt one of my favorite young up-and-coming directors. He's not really an up-and-coming director at this point, as he's had massive success with films like Whiplash and La La Land, but his filmography is still fairly small, and he's impressed me with every film that he's directed up to this point in different ways, with La La Land being the standout for me personally, a film that I really genuinely cherish and love, and a film that I've caught myself watching on countless occasions since its original release. So when I found out that he had a new film coming out that starred Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt and all these other individuals, I was all in. And when I saw that the movie was 3 hours long, I was also like, okay, cool, longer movie this time around, let's check it out. Unfortunately, I'm very torn on this movie in a lot of ways, and I wish that I loved it a lot more, though I did like a lot about the film, and there's a lot about the film I think there is to love. However, I'll start this off by saying I don't know that this is a film I would recommend to any casual moviegoers, nor is it a movie that I think I would recommend to people to go and rush to the theaters to see, unfortunately, even though I think there is a lot about this film on a technical level that really works. Let's start with the things I enjoyed about this film. Like I mentioned, this film takes us back to early Hollywood, specifically from the 20s into the 30s, as we see the transition from silent pictures into sound pictures, or as they were known at the time, talkies. And that was definitely something I was really interested in, because if you guys have been watching this channel for a while, you know that majority of the reviews here on this channel are for older films, and I have spoken on many of occasions, as well as actually covering some. I have spoken about the fact that I love older cinema, black and white cinema, even going all the way into the 20s and 30s. So this is a world that I'm fairly familiar with and something I have a lot of admiration for. Now, do you need to have an admiration for that era of filmmaking to fully appreciate this movie? No, but I do think it's really gonna help your experience when it comes to this film. So if you are not really familiar with films of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and really maybe what kind of came to be in that time and the advancements that happened, I do feel like you might have a little bit of a disconnect, even though the movie does a good job of kind of showing that transition. Over the course of the film, this is a movie that focuses on a bunch of different individuals who work within this world. You have Brad Pitt, who's playing a big movie star who was really popular in the silent era and is now finding himself struggling as we move into the talkies era, and maybe realizing that his prime was behind him. Then you have Margot Robbie, who in and of herself thinks that she is a star before she's even given the chance to be in a movie, and then gets completely engrossed in that world, but finds herself more involved in things like the drugs, the sex, the partying, and not really the art form itself. Then you have Diego Calva, who is in some ways maybe probably the main star of the movie alongside Margot Robbie, and he is an individual who, when we first meet him, is an elephant wrangler working alongside people in the film industry and just wants to get his foot in the doors to be able to be on set, and over the course of the film does find success in the film industry, but also starts to lose himself in this world. And then in a small role over the course of the film, you have Jovan Adepo, who I feel really symbolizes the individual more so than anybody in the film, who has a passion for the art. He is a jazz musician and does get himself into movies, and in the end truly just wants to love the art form more so than the world that tries to praise his art form. And in so many ways, I found this to be an interesting deep dive about LA of the time, Hollywood in general, and filmmaking world of the time. It obviously speaks on the lack of boundaries when it came to things, the standards, the expectations that people put on themselves and put on others, and of course, the drugs, the sex, the greed, and the insanity around this kind of a thing. But unfortunately, I think this is a movie that suffers from going a little over the top when it comes to excess. Now, of course, we know that early Hollywood and Hollywood in general for many decades was just littered with just insanity, craziness, drugs, sex, people doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons, people doing maybe the right things for the wrong reasons, whatever the case may be. It was a crazy world where people were able to get, jobs in movies or get kicked out of movies for the silliest and craziest reasons, or for really fucked up and shady reasons as well. We already know that there are tons and tons of stories of individuals who were living these high, big, over-the-top lives filled with drugs and drinking and partying and sex that just led to just their whole life being ruined. And you would see that going on years down the line with things like from the 60s to the 80s with the rock and roll phase of just sex, drugs, and rock and roll just being absolutely all over the place. So it's definitely something the entertainment industry has definitely suffered from, but this is a movie that takes it to the next level, and I think that at times it undercuts its overall themes. It is crazy to see the big spectacle that this film has at times when it comes to its big parties that are filled with cocaine, drugs, sex, and all kinds of other things going on here. But at a certain point, it kind of feels like a shock value thing. There's a lot of boobies in this movie. There's people in huge rooms just having orgies while they're drinking and partying and dancing and partying and partying even some more. This movie has a lot of really big excess moments to the point where it almost becomes funny to watch. And while this movie might deal with some serious things and characters who are going through some really deep struggles in their life and different things like alcoholism or poor relationships that they can't manage or just their whole lives crumbling around them, this is also a film where you have Margot Robbie throwing up Exorcist style on an individual at one point in the film, and a point in the movie where a guy has explosive diarrhea from an elephant pouring all over him, and the camera really gets in there showing every droplet of super wet diarrhea pouring all over this individual. This is a movie that on IMDb is listed as a comedy drama history film, even though it's not based on any actual true events and just kind of tells its own story within this transition from silent pictures to talkies. But yeah, this is a movie that at times I feel was trying to be really serious and then undercuts itself with some of these tonal changes over the course of the film. One thing I mentioned in the intro of this review was Tobey Maguire, who you see in the trailers for this movie, and unfortunately is a really unnecessary character in this movie. And even though I enjoyed his over-the-top, unhinged performance, as we continued on with the entire segment of the film that features his character, it just felt wildly unnecessary. And what I think is really interesting about this film, and while I was watching it, what I was thinking and what I was trying to take from the movie is that you have something like La La Land that Damien Chazelle did that was a love letter to Hollywood, to LA, and a love letter to the idea of going to California, going to LA with a dream. And even though that movie highlights the struggles of actually reaching those dreams, it does obviously in the end have a message of if you strive for it, if you push for it, you will be able to make those dreams a reality, which is why I think a lot of people enjoy that film, because it's a film for dreamers. And when it comes to this film, it's almost an opposite, where it's almost a warning about the film industry. And if you just go to any sort of entertainment, I would say, and just try to push for this ability for you to reach a certain status, and you start to just lose yourself in the wrong things, in the drugs, the sex, the excess, the alcohol, whatever the case may be, you can find yourself falling down a really dark rabbit hole of a bunch of individuals who are willing to do anything for a buck to be put on screen or gain any sort of attention. And so there's a lot about this film, as you can tell, that I'm dissecting in my mind that I think was interesting, and there were messages and themes that I took from it. But at the end of the day, this is sadly a film that I found to be a little bit dull overall. The movie is a little bit over 3 hours, and just having seen Avatar: The Way of Water twice within the last week and a half, that movie does not feel its runtime. Whatever your thoughts on the story or whatever you think about the movie in general, For me, that movie was just really well paced. It never really feels boring. And while I found myself not necessarily bored while watching this movie, I do 110% see how this movie will and may bore many moviegoers that go into this just kind of expecting to watch, just an interesting film about filmmaking of this time. This is a movie that is overly long and felt like it ended about 4 times and just kept going and going, to the point where while I was watching this movie, I completely forgot. Even though Tobey Maguire was one of the things I was the most interested about when I went into the movie, I forgot he was in the movie because he doesn't show up until the last 30-40 minutes of the film. And when he shows up, it just feels like this insane sequence that just the film doesn't need and feels completely disjointed from the whole first part of the movie. And then the last 10 or 15 minutes, in so many ways for me, was just really jumbled and all over the place. And I struggled to kind of feel 100% on what I should take away from this movie as I was sitting there in the theater. Overall, this is a movie with fantastic performances, really great cinematography, and a great score, as Damien Chazelle does team up with Linus Sandgren, who did the cinematography for First Man and La La Land, as well as composer Justin Hurwitz, who also did Whiplash and La La Land and First Man alongside Damien Chazelle. There's so much artistry put on screen here, and there's so much that really honors the legacy of old Hollywood, but also does some really interesting things to demonize it at the same time. It's a film about film progression and the individuals within it and how they're easily forgotten at times, but the struggle of those individuals at times as well. At times it felt like a character study of these individuals being destroyed in different ways by the film industry. At times it felt like something that was honoring the early Hollywood and the progression of film. And then at times it just felt like this really over-the-top movie that was more about filling a room with a bunch of attractive people having sex, a bunch of boobies being out, bunch of people doing lines of coke, and having a lot of really big bombastic cinematography and music around it the entire time. Beyond that, I found this film to just be something emotionally I couldn't connect to, even if I have all of this to say. I never really found myself connected to the characters emotionally, and I think that's where I struggled the most when it came to this film, is that compared to the other films that this director has done, I'm not sure I'm looking to revisit this one anytime soon. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about a movie that I am actually looking forward to revisiting at some point, and that is Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio. Directed by Guillermo Del Toro alongside Mark Gustafson, Del Toro wrote this film alongside Patrick McHale and Matthew Robbins, and stars people like Gregory Mann as Pinocchio, Ewan McGregor, David Bradley as Geppetto, Ron Perlman, Tilda Swinton, Finn Wolfhard, Cate Blanchett, and many more. So this is a movie I was really interested in, as I had seen tons and tons of things that Guillermo had been talking about leading up to this film, as he had been working on this for about a decade and trying to make this a reality. And so finally being able to see this movie come out and finally catching it, it's been out on Netflix for the last few weeks, I was absolutely thrilled and completely engrossed in this movie from beginning to end. I haven't covered an abundance of them here on the channel yet, but stop motion animation is without a doubt one of my favorite film animation styles of all time. I've talked about it here on the channel with some of the films that I have covered, with my most notable one, my favorite one, being The Nightmare Before Christmas, which may seem like a generic answer to many, but I just love that film, and I've always loved stop motion animation because that was my first film that introduced me to it, and ever since then I've gone out in my whole life trying to find a bunch of stop motion films to watch, and I have loved so many because this art form is just so unique and brings such a grounded realism to its storytelling that regular animation a lot of times just can't. And then take one of my favorite art styles and mix it with a director like Guillermo Del Toro, who brings a different, dark, whimsical world, and you just have something that is so unique. Similar to other Pinocchio stories, there are going to be familiar beats in terms of the narrative that you can expect here, but it does so much that is so different, as this film is actually set during World War II, I believe, or something along those lines, and it has its own kind of universe that is completely different from the other Pinocchio films that we've seen. Gregory Mann, who plays Pinocchio in this film, I thought was phenomenal and was an absolute standout in comparison to the Pinocchio that we had earlier this year, which I didn't hate, but I didn't love. I wanted to enjoy that film a lot more, and I'm not going to sit here and compare the Disney live action one versus this one, but it's hard when we just have them a couple of months apart. And this one is an animated one once again, but stop motion, and has just so much more artistry, just visually, than anything that live action remake did. And Gregory Mann is definitely a standout standout here because he gives a really great kid performance here as Pinocchio, somebody who really does feel like a kid and sounds like a kid and is a really good actor. He brought a lot of energy to this performance that feels very tangible, very real, and felt emotional. And I was so completely engrossed in Pinocchio's story, and a lot of that really has to go to Gregory Mann and the amount of humanity that he brought to the role of Pinocchio. David Bradley as Geppetto is phenomenal in this film, and I just really love the heart that he brought to this character. This is a far darker take on the character of Pinocchio and the story of Pinocchio. If you are not familiar with Pinocchio overall, Geppetto ends up making Pinocchio. Of course, we know this because of the fact that his son passed away. And in this iteration, we do see that happen, and it is pretty dark. Guillermo Del Toro does not hold back from giving us that dark element that always comes in his film, while also leaning heavily into the whimsy and wonder that his films are also laced with. And it's David Bradley's performance and his loss of his son and his connection with Gregory Mann as Pinocchio over the course of the film that really makes the heart of this film work 100%. Ewan McGregor is also great in this film as Sebastian J. Cricket, Jiminy Cricket, or this film's iteration of that. And I really enjoyed just hearing Ewan McGregor in a voice role. We don't get too many films where he does voice work, and it's just always fantastic anytime I see something where he's able to lend his voice to a character. And once again, since Shape of Water, Del Toro was actually able to work with Alexandre Desplat, who did the score for this film, which I thought was phenomenal. And I really enjoyed the music of this film, specifically the musical numbers throughout, which I found to be really solid throughout the entirety of the film, with the standout song in this movie, without a doubt, being Ciao Papa, sung by Pinocchio in this film, which I thought was the emotional core when it came to any of the musical themes in this movie. Overall, if you're looking for a different take on Pinocchio, something that's dark and whimsical, but still has that heart, has that charm, and is 110% different outside of the bare bones structure of what the Pinocchio story is, I think this is 100% a definitive version of Pinocchio now for me. This is an iteration I will look forward to revisiting as years and years go on. It stands out amongst all the other ones, including the Disney films. And even though I love the original film that Disney did, the animated film, this one is just so different and so unique and has that Del Toro stamp on it in such a unique fashion that I just found myself completely engrossed in this world. And honestly, I wish that the movie was a little bit longer. So that's obviously a recommendation on Del Toro's Pinocchio, but without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my final film that we're going to be talking about here. And it's a film that dropped on Disney Plus instead of getting the theatrical release that it was originally meant to get, and that is Disenchanted. Disenchanted is the long-awaited sequel to Enchanted that is directed this time around by Adam Shankman, who's directed things like Hairspray, Rock of Ages, and A Walk to Remember, and once again stars people like Amy Adams, Patrick Dempsey, James Marsden, Idina Menzel, and some new faces like Maya Rudolph and Gabriella Baldacchino. So this is a movie that came out a little bit over a month ago at this point, I believe, on Disney Plus, and I was really bummed when I found out that it wasn't going to be getting the theatrical release that it was originally meant to get. But after seeing the film, I guess I can kind of see how that kind of came to be. It wasn't necessarily as strong as I thought the movie was going to be, but I'm happy to say I enjoyed it. I found myself entertained while watching the film, and it was nice and nostalgic to kind of be revisited by some of these characters from the first film of Enchanted. Now, similar to the first film Enchanted, this film has a fairly predictable narrative, but I don't think this film has as much of the heart and charm and character work that the first film had. I also feel that the first film had way better and more memorable songs, even though I did enjoy the music of this film, and I felt that it really did go well with the film itself. The music this time around being done by Alan Menken, who is just a legacy composer and music writer overall when you look at Disney, going all the way back to things like The Little Mermaid and dozens of other films under the Disney filmography. So this movie opens and we get a recap on what happened in the first film. Of course, we know the character of Giselle, played by Amy Adams, was a cartoon character from a mystical, fantastical world, a fantasy land, and ends up coming into the real world where she thinks that she is a princess. She's singing to all the animals and she's living like she's a character from a cartoon. And then, of course, she ends up meeting Patrick Dempsey's character, who has a young daughter named Morgan. They end up falling in love, and in the end of the movie, she ends up staying in the normal world and does not return back to the cartoon world that she is from. So we jump into this movie, and we're introduced to her character once again. We get a recap on what happened, like I mentioned, and we see that Morgan has grown up now. She's a teenager, and we find that Giselle is not necessarily happy in New York anymore and chooses to move Robert and their teenage daughter to a brand new place, as they also have a new baby as well, and she wants to start a new life in a new place. Of course, like a lot of these movies do, they do arrive to the new place and find that they're not very happy. Not everybody's really satisfied, and to try and make this new place a fantasy land, Giselle ends up using a wand given to her by Idina Menzel and James Marsden as a gift, and uses all the magic from their magical world that they originally came from to turn her new town into a fairy tale. The mayor of this town is played by Maya Rudolph, and she's not really the nicest mayor. She's not really the nicest person, a bit cocky and selfish and greedy. And after this fairy tale wish ends up coming to be, she ends up becoming the evil queen of this land. And as the fairy tale starts to kind of set in stone in this new location, Giselle also finds that since she is a stepmother to Morgan, she starts to find herself becoming an evil stepmother. And over the course of the film, must work to try and find a way to reverse the wish that she's done now, turning the real world into a magical fairy tale where she is going to become an evil stepmother, and she's going to end up having ruined the life of her family even more so than she ever could have imagined. At its core, this is a pretty straightforward family film with a pretty predictable narrative, a very undercooked love interest in the teenage department, and some pretty just predictable elements. I wasn't in love with this film, but I enjoyed it. I wanted to cover it here on the channel. I haven't covered the first Enchanted yet, but at some point I'd like to for sure. I think that if you were a fan of the first Enchanted, there's something to be enjoyed here, but based on some of the other reception I've seen from others, this is a movie that obviously is going to be a hit or a miss depending on what you're into. Where I think that this movie really shines for sure are in its performances, its vocal performances, as I really did find that the music was solid throughout, even though there wasn't any of the songs that I'm singing the same way maybe I sang some of the songs from the first film after having watched that one. There was elements about this film that I was really engrossed in when it came to the music and the overall visuals of this film. The CGI is a little bit cartoony, but you kind of need that in a film like this, so I didn't mind that too much, and I really enjoyed the costume design and set design, as we do have full sections of this movie that have all the characters in big fantastical outfits in fantastical settings that I feel did really elevate the overall look and production value of the film. But I do have to be honest and say that it was a predictable movie. I saw where it was going. I never really found myself too engrossed or too lost in the stakes. I never really found myself really worrying about our characters and where things were going to go. And unfortunately, like I mentioned, I thought the first film did a lot better when it came to the character work, with this film having character work that I found was a little bit flimsy at times. The main work really goes into the characters of Giselle and her stepdaughter Morgan, as they're the ones that really have the most fleshing out over the course of the film, and it's their bond that has to kind of be remended over the course of the film, because Morgan isn't really connecting with her stepmother the same way she did in the first film, where she was completely in love with the idea of this princess now coming into her world, and now she's kind of over it. And so they have to mend their relationship again. This is a movie about mother and daughter, and more notably a story about kind of removing the title of just simply a stepmother and really realizing that Giselle is Morgan's mother and has been Morgan's mother for all these years. And so there was a touching narrative there, even though I saw 110% where it was going to go. And unfortunately though, outside of those two characters, people like Patrick Dempsey and even Maya Rudolph being the main villain, I just found that they were kind of sidelined and weren't really given a whole lot to do. Specifically Patrick Dempsey, who just felt like he was running around the whole movie, not really having much to do until the very end. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Those are my thoughts on Babylon, as well as Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio and Disenchanted. Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say down below. Have you seen these movies? Are you planning on seeing these movies? Leave any and all thoughts down below. I want to thank all of you guys who got this far into the video, listen to me rambling about all these movies. I really appreciate you guys. I'm not gonna lie, I tried filming this video yesterday and I hadn't even gotten to Disenchanted when I had already filmed as long as I had filmed now, and I just felt like I was all over the place. I got really discouraged and I decided to give up and not film the video, and decided to give myself a little bit more time. So I'm kind of glad I did, but at the same time I just want to take a moment and thank you guys, as I have been dealing with a lot of discouragement when it comes to YouTube, and anybody who sticks by and watches these videos and leaves a comment down below really does help me out in terms of kind of brightening my mood a little bit. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Leave those comments down below and I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye-bye.